world.
Yeah, let's go there.
All right, here we go. We're going to get through. I'm going to start the recording. All right, everybody, welcome back to another edition of the Musicians Mastermind. My name is Lou Lombardi. We've got Carrie J.K. In the house today, and we just want to kind of take some time and discuss why you should, more than ever, you should be making music. Whether you have any kind of grand plans of being a rock star, no matter what age bracket you feel like you fall into, whether you feel like you have any kind of pop marketability or not, that it's really important to just make freaking music and try to get it to as many people as possible. Starting with friends and family, passing it around on social media, whatever. Right now, the music business is relatively flat, meaning that we used to have this giant curve where there was artists at the periphery, and there was this kind of mountain that went up and up and up till you had the artists at the very top. And that top always, was always a big, knock a man off the mountain kind of game, right, Carrie? You know what I mean? The Bee Gees were riding high, for, a year during the disco era, and then somebody else came and knocked them off. And then the 80s came along, and it was Madonna and Prince and Michael Jackson, and they were all clamoring for the flag at the top of the mountain, and you had all these artists that were kind of on the sides there of the slopes, either trying to work their way up or hold on for dear life. And then what happened after, the internet really broke and we were able to download high quality files and listen to music, and the music business itself became more democratized. You were able to market your own music and create. I mean, Carrie's got a studio in his house. I have a studio in my house. Like you guys probably all have studios in your house. So this idea that you have to, climb the big ladder of success to even put out music. So that mountain has become like a little hill. And the rest of the landscape is more spread out, where you've got artists all over the place, kind of like at an equal level, creating music. So it can be a little, we've talked about this before. Carrie, how many artists are putting out like new music every day? You've given me some statistics over the years.
A lot. I don't have that quote to hand right now, but
it's crazy.
I'm just going to look in my notebook if I can find it. But I do know that it has gone up exponentially. And the quote that I heard, I think somebody had said it was some guy did an interview. He said when he'd started, there'd been like 500 records released every week, and now it was something like 5,000. And if your record that you released on that day just sounded like all those others, then it was just going to get lost in the shuffle. There had to be something that made it stand out, or there has to be, which is the problem, because the other trend that's gone is that it's become much easier to homogenize music.
Very good. That's where I wanted to go with this. Good. Go ahead.
And so we've sort of ended up with these like two sort of developments working against each other now, in that it's much easier to get stuff in there and out there. It's very easy to have the tools to take shortcuts, but it's also made it much more important to actually stand out. So you end up with a lot of people making stuff, thinking that they've got to do jump through certain hoops or use certain processes that will just leave them sounding like everybody else.
Yeah.
And we're sort of like at least 15 years off the point where you can really sort of like pitch forward now by sounding like everyone else, unless you are really good at marketing or a really good people person in some other way.
Yeah.
But yeah, so many people make music now, and this can be depressing, or it can be invigorating. And it can be depressing if you think suddenly, what's the point? I'm never going to be a superstar. There's so many people who are doing it better than I am. But then it's inspiring if you think, yes, there's lots of people doing it, but that just means I'm part of the universe just like I was before, and none of those people are me. Part of I think that's the list of it really, is like, why are you making music in the first place? Why are you writing a novel? Why are you painting a picture? Why are you doing any of these things to express yourself? And if the answer is to become rich and famous and to be a professional writer, to be a professional musician, or to be a whatever, good luck to you. Hope it works out well for you. But if that's your only goal, then you're going to experience a lot of frustration along the way.
Yeah.
And if people not listening to it is enough to make you quit, then it's a goal you're never going to accomplish.
I think that you touched on some a whole bunch of stuff that I kind of want to kind of go through in a little bit more detail. One of the things is it can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing, and it has to do with your attitude about it. You can everybody's going to approach everything a little bit differently, and you should. Where I think where we run into trouble, and I think where it becomes kind of depressing, is if you are really trying to imitate something. You're really trying to, like, as you were saying, Carrie, like, become, become rich and famous. You have to kind of take a step back and say, well, what am I trying to say musically? And I've heard different, business coaches and different counselors and stuff say stuff to people like, is this the way you have to kind of make your living? Or is there some other way? And then maybe music or comedy or art or film or whatever it is that you're passionate about, maybe is something that doesn't have to be something that you're like living at, but you're just really, really passionate about it, and you still do it freaking amazing. You don't necessarily, so the one does not necessarily have to go with the other. I know that sounds a little counterintuitive, but maybe you have something going on. I mean, there's a lot of people that, I was thinking about Stephen King. He didn't know what Carrie was going to do. He was a freaking English teacher. He was a school teacher. I mean, Sting was a school teacher. I mean, a lot of people just had jobs and just were passionate about the music or the art that they wanted to make, and didn't really care because they knew, well, I'm going to go for this thing over here. But hey, I'm not like, if I don't get rich and famous at it, and to have a little bit of like what they call FU money, not in the sense that you're rich and you can do whatever you want, but the sense that like, hey, look, I'm okay. I can make great music. I can make it the way I want. I can take the time and really perfect it, make it excellent, really kind of, do it the right way without all this, I got to be famous in 3 weeks kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. And where that's going there, at the moment it's gone immediately. But you said about FU money, about having the money to just be able to do it. I mean, never let anyone call you a jerk for keeping the day job.
Yeah, absolutely.
But know what you live for.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the older adage? You work to live, you don't live to work.
Exactly.
And so if you're doing a day job that isn't consuming your everyday life, I mean, this is one thing. I mean, real life one way or another, life demands compromise, and that includes if you're a professional artist. It means that the art that you're going to end up making is going to be what puts food on the table. I was a professional musician. I used the past tense because it drove me up the wall. It meant the art that I could make wasn't the art I wanted to be making. And if I did want to do something that was a bit more creative or a bit more out there, it would just take food off the table, and I'd have to go off and do a wedding instead.
Yeah.
And it ended up to the point where my whole life would be doing weddings or chasing up invoices for work I didn't really want to do in the first. That's the other thing no one tells you about being a professional artist. Most of it is chasing up invoices. Yeah. The actual artistic bit you do for free. What you're getting paid for is sitting in a transit van for hours at a time, driving off somewhere, for loading up and breaking down, for writing so many fucking invoices that people will stiff you on at every opportunity. That is the reality of being a professional musician. And if that's actually your dream, then again, good luck to you. But I think your dream is to make art.
Yeah, you're making a really, really good point there. Because I'll give you a really good example. My guitar teacher, mentor, the guy that really kind of got me going in music, was this amazing jazz guitar player. And I was always like, Tony, like, why don't you release a record? And he says, I'm just too busy making money. I have to make money. I've got kids. I've got a house. I've got a mortgage. And so there's just no way for me to that comes like last. And another guy that I know, another mentor of mine, great musician, but the aspect of the music business that he was primarily in, again, was the business aspect of it, and did not put out. I don't think that he putting out as many records and as much music as he would really love to do, because I believe this other business that I don't think that he dislikes at all. And both these guys love teaching, so it's not like they were like, breaking rocks, for a living or something like that. But you have to kind of keep that in mind, like, really, what do you want to do? What is really important to you when you start playing music? What I want to move to a little bit here, and I'd like you to talk about this because I know you're involved with Fresh on the Net, is when you're young. And you get so...
Hell yeah, get your ass out on tour when you're young.
Well, what I was going to say
that's the time to do it.
What I was going to say was, when you're young and you have all these ideas and all this passion and all this energy, I think when you get a little bit older, you start to kind of forget about that. And I think that it's important to kind of find some way to always be finding a way to recapture that kind of like curiosity about music, creativity about music, because I think, and you know how, like, and we can name a bunch of bands, AC/DC is a really good example of a band that like fell into a thing, right? Every AC/DC record is pretty much the same. Okay. That's their shtick. And I think a lot of musicians at lower levels kind of end up getting in ruts and grooves and stuff like that. And I think they've lost some of this like exuberance about when they first heard music and were like experimenting. I mean, I think both of us did that, Kerry. Didn't you when you were a kid? Yeah. It's one thing I know that I did. I grew up in the cassette era, and I had cassette players, and I would make, I would bounce tracks using a dual cassette player, and I was constantly trying to be creative and trying to get new sounds and things like that. And I think that is something that is missing a lot, because as we were talking before the podcast, it's so easy to press a button or to get an app or to, download a patch or to get a loop or whatever. Why don't you, what do you think about, like, how should we go about, like, keeping it fresh?
No, the story I always tell is, I think it was around about the mid-90s. I went into a music shop and I was always like trying around in the keyboard rooms and the keyboard player. And I think it was the first time I walked into one and I pressed the key and a whole song came out. Because all of them arpeggiate, and I knew what an arpeggiator was. I generally didn't use them because I was a jazz snob. And that is my background, which I'll get to in a bit. But this key, as I pressed it, it brought in all the different MIDI parts, and the arpeggiators went through, and there were drum loops that were triggering. And as I went across the keyboard, it did all these other things. And I thought, wow, this is great. I could just make up an instant song just like that. It'll sound fantastic. And then I looked around the room, and I realised that at that time there were maybe 30 more people in that music shop. And that day, their footfall might have been a few hundred people. And through the course of the week, and every single one of them could have walked up to that keyboard, pressed that key, and thought, wow, I could make a really good record out of this. And all of those records would sound absolutely the fucking same. And that's pretty much what's happened. Yeah. I knew on that day that was not the path I wanted, and it wasn't for me. And sure enough, there was an interviewer who, when I was in Zeitgeist Zero, which was an electronic band, and I started using a bit more of the arpeggiators and those things there. I called them Delia cheats, which is like sort of little things that you buy in the kitchen that you didn't make from scratch. But one of the interviewers who came up, and he used the words "electronica begat laziness." And I think at the time she said that what he's basically saying is, I don't like electronic music. Why do I like your electronic music? And if you listen to stuff like Aphex Twin, that was one of the guys that really showed this, that you could make electronic music that wasn't just based on regurgitating loops, but was actually super creative in terms of programming it. So he made an effort to make electronic music that actually sounded individual and that didn't just do things that were predictable. But then there's so much more that does, because people realize you could just press a key, get a song, and call it a day.
Well, and be careful too, guys, because a lot of the canned sounds that are out there, and it has permeated. It has gone beyond keyboards and drums. It's with the guitar as well, with all the modeling, all the impulse response technology. This technology is great, but you got to remember that, like, if everybody is using the same guitar tone, how are you going to distinguish yourself? We're recording this, what's today, the 10th, October 10th, and a few days ago Eddie Van Halen died. There was a, there was a guy that spent hours, years, really playing around with his tone. And one of the things that really made him stand out was yes, he took advantage of the technology, but he grabbed hold of it to try to make something of his own out of it. Another guitar player that I think falls right in line with this, and these guys sound nothing alike, is The Edge from U2. Mm-hmm. I mean, I just rewatched that movie, It Might Get Loud. I mean, I was watching with another person who's a very beginning guitar player. She's just learning. And she's like, what the hell with all that freaking gear? But but he plays with that gear and messes with it to extract something emotional out of it. So it isn't like, it's just some patch and I just downloaded and I plugged in and I'll just use that. You have to be very aware that one of the reasons why I think a lot of people people that aren't musicians that are just listening to music, and I hear this complaint all the time, that like a lot of the new music that they hear, and while the songwriting may be competent, they feel like there's a sort of like plasticness to it or a kind of blandness to it. It lacks something special. And I think that this is part of what a lot of people who are like, who can't get into it, I think this is what they're dealing with, is this just sounds too homogenized, or it sounds too much like, the same sounds. Nobody has taken the time to really try to get us. I mean, everybody, just not everybody, young folks probably don't know, but about John Bonham and the getting the sound on When the Levee Breaks, and all of John Bonham sounds. I mean, those were microphones moved around in different rooms and everything. Those sounds were in many ways unduplicatable. Is that the word I want?
Yeah.
And that made them special. So you've got to find a way to make this is why sound, tone, soundscapes, all that is really, really important, because many times this is what can really set you apart. I mean, just think, one of the things that I remember as a young person, when the first time I heard Madonna, and I heard the song Like a Virgin. Vocally, she sounded nothing like anybody else on the radio. She did not sound like any of the big like female rock artists. She didn't sound like Heart or Pat Benatar or anything like that. It was the second she opened her mouth, you knew who she was. And you could have criticized her voice, or people say she wasn't a very good singer, blah, blah, blah. It didn't matter, because it immediately grabbed you, because it was very cool. It was very different. It was like something we hadn't heard yet. And
she's always been rich on his concepts.
Yeah. So that's what you have to you want to be looking at, like, and even if you have a fault, maybe there's a way to kind of turn that so-called fault into something.
I mean, this is what I'm getting to, is like, and what you're actually going to end up with, whatever your instrument, and what will make you, what will make your style and make you individual. You're always looking for that sweet spot between perfection and imperfection. And I'm going to explain that. Perfection, because you need to be able to fucking play.
You got to play, right?
Yeah, but you need to learn your tools. And if there's nothing worse than having an idea in your head and not being able to do it because you just don't have the skills. So you'll spend your whole life acquiring the best skill set you can. And 90% of the stuff you learn, you will never use until one day. And on that one day, you'll be able to pull that skill out of the box, and it will make exactly the idea you've had in your head. And that's why you learned it all the rest of the time. So that's the perfection side of it. You work hard on being as good as you can. Don't listen to anybody who says that you can't be a muso and an artist. People say that who don't want to practice. And even, I mean, like, I went through this. As I said before, I was a jazz snob, and I came up through jazz. But what bothered me is that jazz then, again, this is the pressures of having to make a living from it. I had to do like really toothless jazz in order to make a living. And when I wanted to do stuff, like when I wanted to like follow along with somebody like John Zorn or Albert Ayler, then I wouldn't make any money. But that was sort of like what was exciting me. Yeah. And so what I ended up with, I sort of followed it into punk rock, and I went in the opposite direction, where I deliberately dumbed down everything that I was doing. Not completely, because I couldn't, because my instinct, I still couldn't hide everything I knew. So I was still doing a lot of muso stuff in there. But I was trying to get back to concepts. And what I've sort of ended up with now is that sort of like combination between having the sort of like musical technique and the musical chops to be able to do things, but coming at it from enough artistic credibility and enough ideas, enough concepts that I can say, I can do this, but only if I want to.
Yeah.
And that's the point you're trying to get to. And the other thing is, if your skills aren't good enough to be able to do all this, that makes it much harder to tell somebody no when they insist on you using auto-tune, or they insist on quantizing your drum parts or changing them into drum triggers, or in getting in. I mean, like that's. I suppose that's the new thing. I mean, before, when it used to be like ghost players, like we made the joke. One of in all the bits about Van Halen, somebody made the joke with saying like, I promise. He said in 1979 that he'd had a big argument with somebody when he said that Van Halen and Kiss were the same band. Look, I says, well, look, there's probably as much chance of Van Halen being on a Kiss record then as any member of Kiss, because everything was under session musicians then.
Oh yeah,
and so it's kind of like auto-tune and quantization is like the new session musicians, really, in terms of how they insist on this. But you've got more chance in telling your producer and your record company that you're not going to take that route if you've got the skills to not need to. And the problem is, because it's so easy now along the way to make up for those lack of skills and make up for that lack of practice, a lot of people don't bother. Glenn Fricker of Spectre Sound Studios, he said in his last video that it was about the first Van Halen album. We said before, how did you feel the first time you heard Eruption? And I think everyone, it just blew them away.
Yeah.
I mean, Brian May, who's another guy who had his own unique sound because of the way he approached things. But he said that when they first heard Eruption, it was like he'd been waiting for that all of his life. And then suddenly this record dropped and he heard it and he thought, wow, yes. It's finally arrived, and it's because he just sat down and he played the damn thing.
Yeah,
and that's what made it art. And if it had been something that had to be like, right, now we're going to do this, and then somebody says, okay, now I'm going to auto-tune this bit, and I'm going to chop out that bit, and this is going to go here, and then we'll do that. It would not have been the same. And the other thing is, not only would it not be the same, somebody else could then have done exactly the same thing the next time, and now it's not unique. Now it's homogenized. I couldn't put my finger on it. I think it was one of the rock festivals. I think it was Download or one of the rock festivals I was watching a couple of years ago. And I'd always loved rock festivals, but that one left me cold. And every band that came on, I watched it, and I realised what it was, is they all sounded exactly like the record. And that bothered me. It's like, if I want to listen to that, and that had always been one of the things that separated metal from other styles of music, is that it was about the live performance, and no one expected it to be like the record, just like jazz. When you listen to a metal record or a jazz record, you didn't expect it to be the same as when you went to a jazz or a metal gig, because they're different experiences. But now we've got to the band, there's so many bands who come on who just have to sound exactly like the record. In fact, the only band that really blew me away at that festival were a southern rock band. I can't remember what they were because it's something like I think they're a brothers team, but because they did it old school and because they just kicked out a jam, I just felt they blew away everyone else on that stage, including some huge names. And it was because they just stood there and they played. There was nothing artificial about it.
Well,
and we have kind of lost that.
There is a you're absolutely right. I think it's a kind of like I think it depends on the genre, and I think it kind of depends on your audience and kind of how you've set it up with them as to what they are going to expect when they see you live. Because I know exactly what you're saying, and many times I have gone to see really good bands and been a little bored because I was like, I could have like avoided all this expense and all this like annoying people and everything and just like listen to my record. But then there are times when where it is impressive. It just, again, like this is a nuanced point. There is no exact completely right or wrong. What I do think is unfortunate, and this definitely started, I remember there was big controversy about this in the 80s, is artists playing to tracks and things like that, and how that is used live, and that. What are we really hearing? Are you really even hearing the band? I heard, a lot of 80s artists would, and again, I heard this about Madonna as well, would play with the actual recording of the song playing. So the band would play along with the recording as it was playing, because they were really trying to make it sound as, I don't know, what as big as possible, or is like, yes, live, but also recorded. I don't really know what the purpose of that was. A lot of singers just completely have replaced their own vocals with recorded stuff. Kiss was accused of doing this, although my co-host on on the Rock and Roll Circus, Lily, has seen them a number of times, and she has said that no, if this was a recording, it was terrible because both the guys could not sing. So it was like they probably weren't, they had probably, because they probably got called out on it and, stopped doing it. But so there is, I'm not really sure. I wouldn't want to go and hear you just pantomiming the tracks for sure. But say you were doing something special, like say you had some intro. Like one of the things we wanted to do in Strangelove was we wanted to come on to Thus Spake Zarathustra. Thus Spake Zarathustra, from 2001. And obviously we weren't going to play that, but it would have been a thing the audience would have realized that this was a recording. We weren't actually performing this classical piece, as a sort of special effect. So maybe something like that is maybe an exception to that.
Like Queen never did the opera part from Bohemian Rhapsody live.
Yeah.
They'd play the rest of the song live, but when the opera part came on, it would be pre-recorded and they'd leave the stage.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
so they were honest about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I was in an industrial band, so we had stuff that was on a backing track. I mean, I wasn't happy doing it, certainly at the beginning, but I sort of went along with it. But the rule we ended up with was if a machine played it on the record, a machine played it on stage. Because I wasn't going to do a 300-mile round trip to stand on there and just play something that was better done by a machine. However, the other rule was that couldn't be all we had. And so what we did play on stage would be augmenting it and would actually be live performance. So I would be adding the pianos, the strings, the synths, and stuff that actually benefited from having a live musician play it. We never had pre-recorded vocals or guitars on there. It didn't matter if there was massive layered guitars on the track. When it was played live, there was one guitar part, and he played it as an aggregate of all his other parts.
Right.
And so we had a live experience and we had a recorded experience, and they weren't meant to be the same.
Getting back to the live recording, the live performance and versus the recorded, what about, this is something that has become very difficult, I think, for musicians to do. And this is something that I think is tough for indie musicians because of space requires people. Like I said, everybody's got a studio, but not everybody's got like room to set up an entire band and mic it all and do all that stuff. So how does someone go about giving it as much of an interactive live feel as possible when maybe what they have to do, say we take Glenn Fricker's advice and we say, look, we're not recording with canned drums. I'm going to get a real freaking drummer to play on this. Okay. However, I can't record drums at my space, or maybe I'm not even in a band. I'm a solo artist. Can we work with folks remotely? And how would you suggest you go about doing something like that to get something that sounds really special as opposed to something that sounds cranked out like
now we're talking about the wonders of collaboration. G. Lou, aren't we collaborating right now?
Mm-hmm.
Right now, what are we like? How far are we apart right now? 1,000 miles.
There's an
ocean.
The
Atlantic Ocean.
There's an ocean between us.
Yeah, and here we are having this conversation, and it's going out all around the internet, and a lot more people are realizing this is possible since coronavirus.
Right.
I said before, it took a deadly virus for people to realize this technology has been around for a long time now, and certainly around being able to play. Bands have realized that they can actually collaborate remotely. Not one of it is by recording your stem and sending off, and someone adds their bit, but you can even collaborate live now. Again, with a little bit of technical compromise in there, you can even get to the point now where you can actually jam live and make your parts that way. So it can be done, but even then, finding musicians. We said about the session musicians are on Fiverr or in other places. You can find the people who will play this stuff. Who have a so if you want real drums on your track and you aren't able to set it up, you can hire somebody who does have all that. And depending on your stature or on how much credibility you have, it might even be able to barter in the point where you'll just return the favour for them, so it can be done that way. That's how collaboration's always worked. And I admit I program most of my stuff now. Partly because I'm a misfit loner, but the other reason is that over the years I've got to the point where when I do program stuff, I make it not sound like it was programmed. Like one of the things that Glenn has said is that it's just copy and paste, copy and paste, copy and paste. I kick my own ass if ever anything I do sounds like it's been copied and pasted, and if it does, I'll say there it is. That's a starting point, but it's not done yet. And I will go through and I will change every note of that programmed thing until every part of it is different. So it matches the idea that's in my head. And what it will go back to is I will imagine I'm at that drum kit. I'll even do it. I'll even have a dummy thing that I've done with electric drums. And then I will recreate exactly what it is I want to do. It's not a textbook way of doing it, and it's not the same as doing an actual live drum bit. Sometimes I will use electric drums and I'll program it that, and I will actually play it that way.
Yeah, I was going to say that's another way to get.
And then there's sometimes when I will actually program things and do it another way. And I'm not saying it's right for everybody. It only works for me because I've spent so long now breaking down exactly what goes into this, and I know what things look like. It's like they used to get to know when I was in the studio. They'd know when I was drum programming, I would go into a Zen state, and I was not to be talked to while I was in that state because I was in this land of just like thinking about like this is where it's going to be hitting the physics of it, and that's what it takes. And it's like Rain Man stuff. It's a disability. You don't want to be that guy, seriously, but if you do happen to be that guy, then fucking go there, you know.
What would you? What would you? What if somebody's starting out? You know, I don't mean like they're skilled. They could play a little bit. They could sing. You know, what would be the number like if you could give one piece of advice, one thing that they should like do or never do in order to really kind of give their music that stamp of something special?
Well, I have this thing called the Mabno Creed.
Okay.
And the Mabno Creed is make a noise, make it a better noise, repeat. Now, you're always doing either one or the other. That's the important thing. You're doing both. Make a noise just means you just get out there and you make a noise. You express whatever you've got inside there. You say what you want to say. If writing is your medium or painting or making clothes or whatever it is, then you go out and do that. Then you go away and you look at what you've done. And you think, did it match what I wanted? Or what else is out there? You said before about imitating things. There is a time to imitate it. I mean, August Darnell, Kid Creole, had this thing about, he said, emulation, not imitation, is the key. So you should be listening to as much as you can and having the stuff that you want to emulate. And you probably will imitate it when you're practicing, but you're not going to stop at imitating it. You're only doing that so you can work out the nuts and bolts. And then you bring everything you learn, you bring back into your main understanding, and then you go back to making a noise. At that point, you forget all of that technique, all of that detailed information, all that stuff you've learned. You just throw in the back seat, you throw it in your subconscious, and you just go back to making a noise again. You don't think about the technique, you don't think about the nuts and bolts of it while you're doing it because there isn't time. That's just going to get in the way. But then you do it, and you probably find that the noise you've made is a bit better than the one you made before. Because now you've gone through that process and you've programmed yourself. But now you go back again and you look at what you've made this time and you think, oh, it's all right, but what if? What if I could do this? What if I could hit that note with my voice? What if that was a bit more dirty? What if that one I did by accident? There was that bit where I broke a string and I ended up having to do something else instead. But you know what? I really love that sound. How can I recreate that? St. Vincent, Marianne Clark, she had this thing that she does where she'll get the guitar and she'll make it all out of tune on purpose. She'll just like turn all the machine heads until it's just nothing. And then she'll sit and play with however it sits. And then when she finds something that she likes the sound of, she'll work out exactly what it is she's done and try and transcribe it into something that she can do again. And her mentor was David Byrne. It was all about introducing these random elements. I mean, that was the what was that deck that he did?
You mean Talking Heads?
Yeah, I know it was Brian Eno. Brian
Okay.
Eno's what was the Oblique Strategies deck?
Okay.
The Bleak Strategies deck that Brian Eno did was a deck of cards that would just give you instructions that are deliberately not set instructions to do, but just to make you think about what you're doing in a different way. And one of them would be like make a cup of tea or go for a walk. But something else would be like something like change the lead part for a harmony part. And it was just to throw you out of whatever way you're doing it, so that you'll try something new and hopefully get some new kind of sound. And you wouldn't end up with a record that just sounded the same as everyone else's.
Right. I think one of the things that you could do today to sort of set yourself apart a little bit is never copy and paste anything. Just don't do it.
Actually, I'm gonna caveat that. Do copy and paste it. But that's only step one.
Well, that's what I'm trying.
Then you make it. Then you change the hell out of it.
Let me get my thought out. Let me get my thought out. I think that is a great way to kind of like to structure the demo. Like I do that all the time. I'll like copy and paste things, move things around. No, do I want that over here? No, do I want that? Because sometimes you want to demo it. You want to know. Well, if I put the pre-chorus, maybe the pre-chorus should be a bridge. What would that sound like? So that's where the technology is very, very helpful. But then when you're ready to do it for real, I'm making air quotes, you got to play it. You should just play it. I had an experience with a song that is going to come out very soon where I had to, I was working out this solo. And the solo that I was trying to play was a bit beyond me. And so I started doing it in steps. So I thought, I'm just going to like cheat this thing. You know, I'm going to record this bar, then I'm going to record that bar. I'm going to do the Def Leppard. I think Def Leppard famously would record each note separately. And Mutt Lange would put it together, and then they would have to learn how to play it. But I was kind of going in that direction, and I got so freaking frustrated with it. But I had played all those little sections, so now I had kind of improved as a guitar player because now I could play what it was that I wanted to play. So all that stuff was just a kind of like leading up to it, or like a practice, like you said, like it's like stage one, and then I just played it. And it didn't come out like all the pasted stuff together. It came out as something actually a lot better. So there is a place for that, but on the final thing, no, I want the real thing. You know, so you know, and the same with vocals. Carrie and I, Carrie's helped me produce some vocals, and that's another thing we really just don't want to get into, like pasting this over here because out of laziness or whatever. Another thing I would tell you to kind of play around with is this is something that is not in a lot of pop music today, and that is key changes. There are some people that still kind of do this, but I don't just mean like. You know, because there's a lot of songs that have this dramatic effect where in the last chorus they go up a key or whatever. But within the verse or within the chorus, you can move. This is a jazz idea. Jazz players do this all the time. You know what I mean? They'll go 2-5-1, then they'll go up 2-5-1, then back to the. You know what I mean? They'll use some kind of transitional thing to get them back to the original thing. So I would tell you to kind of like, if there's a place that, without sounding too contrived. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Don't try to crowbar it in if it doesn't fit. But kind of be thinking like, because like if the whole thing is kind of like in the same key the whole way through, sometimes there's places where you can do that to really it really makes the listener's ear kind of go, ooh, what was that? And it doesn't even have to be anything all that complicated. You know, it could be something very simple as like, you know, throwing in, you know, a major sixth back to the fifth. That gets you back home. It's just a quick kind of like, you know, we would, you know, when I was taking piano lessons as a child, we would call that an accidental, you know, that's a kind of funny term. But I would tell you to maybe experiment with some of these, you know, just a couple little concepts like that. And I would say if it's possible at all to play the thing in real time, playing it, try to do it. You know, do your damnedest to do that. And if you have folks that can help you, have them help you do it. You know, if you can get like, oh man, I'm a shitty keyboard player, so I'm gonna like I got a buddy who's really good. You know, so let him play this so it actually sounds, instead of me programming something. I think that this is a way to kind of start to kind of like find something. What's interesting though is, and I had a friend of mine who spent a lot of time in Nashville. Now this is, you would not think about this by Nashville, but and music that was not programmed, like drums that were not programmed and vocals that were not auto-tuned. A lot of these mixing engineers said it's to their ears sounded out of tune and out of time, because they were so used to hearing the computer like fix everything. So I think it's a kind of a dangerous place, because especially country music, folk, that's supposed to be like pretty much acoustic music. It is absolutely not. And this could help you stand out, could make you sound something like a little bit different. I mean, even something, if you got a really good drummer who can play without a click, I mean, why not try it?
Yeah.
Try it.
I mean,
give it a shot.
There was, this is the thing about collaboration is I do a lot of things myself, but there's always a time when there's always someone who can do it better, and you got to know your limits. I'm not that great, but I am a functional guitar player, but I'm not at the level of you.
Okay.
Nowhere near the level of you. There's I think I went to a book signing by Neil Gaiman once. And while we're in the queue there, one of the things Neil Gaiman does is when he signs a book, he'd always have a little doodle that he draws in there with it. And he has set ones that he does for every particular book. And so somebody had asked him, do you ever draw your own stories? Because he does his comic books. And he says, well, I can draw them. And he says, I can draw better than that, he says. And so I don't know what Neil Gaiman's drawings look like, but he says he can do it. He says, the thing is, though, every time I go to do it, I look at the world and I think I can get Mike Dringenberg to draw my stories.
Yeah.
So why am I doing it?
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And if you can, because, if you can get somebody who can really help you, I mean, I think it's always a good thing, and if you have the resources, because you're not tied to, some situation where, if you make this music, you're sacrificing, something else, then if you can hire somebody, if you're in that position, I would take advantage of that. I mean, I don't know if we talked about Leah many times on our podcast, but she's famous for that. A lot of
Yeah.
If you look at her records, there's a lot of famous people who play on her records, because she has the resources.
She's running an organization.
Yeah, she's right. And I have another friend of mine who is he does the same thing. You'd be surprised, because of the way the music business is right now, especially right now. A lot of these people that were charging $500 for whatever to play on your record or whatever are charging a lot less. So don't sell yourself short. Like, if you can get really good players to do something on your record, if you can, if you think it'll work, if you think it's appropriate, if you think it's works with what your project is something to consider, at least. Something to consider, it's the same way, Carrie, you and I have talked about this. Like, I mixed the Strangelove album, but I will never mix another record. It's just not something that it's not even that I didn't enjoy it, but it was wildly time consuming for me. It was really, whereas a mixing guy that mixes bands all the time or music all the time would have done that in a few hours. It took me a few weeks. Hours and hours and hours and hours.
Yeah, the only problem with that now, though, so going back to our original point, is make sure that guy isn't going to take shortcuts.
Can I tell you?
Because I've known name producers, especially if you're not paying them enough money, will farm it off to some other guy who will just stick the autotune on it and call it done. So you need to make sure that whoever you work
absolutely.
with is going to do the job.
I got 2 songs in the can. We're just trying to work with getting artwork together for them, and they are mixed by 2 completely different guys. Everything was recorded right here, all recorded live. Me playing, some other people helping me play and stuff like that. But they sound wildly different. And the one guy's approach was to give it all the bells and whistles. Like, it's got everything. It's got every app they're not called apps, plug-in, excuse me. Every plug-in probably in the computer on it, and it has that very, like, I can't explain, like very studioed, like we called it, in the old days we called it being, oh, that's all studioed out. That's all studioed out. And that's what it really sounds like to me. It's cool. And I'm not going to change it. I'm going to put it out for what it is. But I had worked with another guy who coincidentally charged me half the money, who just took my tracks and just made that work the absolute best he could. I prefer that. It sounds more rock and roll. It sounds more edgy. It sounds more raw. Still sounds good. Like, everything's good. It's in tune. It's solid. You know, he made me go back and replay the bass guitar because he said it wasn't clean enough. You know, that's a producer. That's what they should be telling you to do.
Yeah.
So, like, we got it really good. It sounds freaking great. The drums move a little wee bit because the drummer I played with was like, you know, he played kind of around the click. So in my opinion, it's got like a way better feel. The other song, everything's correct. You know what I mean? And real tight, you know, and has that more kind of like, again, studioed out or kind of modern kind of sound that you would hear. This sounds like this other track, though, sounds much more like 3-4 guys in a room playing rock and roll. And so you've got to kind of figure out what's best for you. And what's going to kind of make it sound special.
The track I did for you had mostly added keyboards. Which I think worked for that one, but it wasn't the route you wanted to go.
I'm actually thinking about re-recording that with the band I'm playing with now, because we do it I play with those guys, and they have a completely different approach to it. Like and it's like a whole new song. So I'm thinking about we have several. We're gonna come down here and record, and I'm thinking about maybe what we're gonna do is put together some kind, like these other songs. These songs came out as kind of singles, but now you're going to hear them with a band. It's going to be kind of like a little bit repurposing some of the material is brand new. But I'm thinking about maybe doing that. I'll have you check it out. But is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up today about anything you want to say to folks that like to tell them, hey, you know, you don't know what's going to happen, man. We don't. Right now, the music business is one way where the world appears to be really screwed up. But keep making music. Like, what? Any sort of focus or tips?
I think basically what it comes down to, the music business, whatever state it's in, it's never been that wonderful of a place to be in. But you're in it because it's what you do. If you're an artist, you're going to make art, and nothing's going to stop you from doing it. So just do that. Do it for the right reasons. Make a noise. And if no one's listening, make it anyway, because you never know who is.
That's right. And you don't know.
And every now and then, something you do will take off. Someone will pay attention to something. Something will catch on, and it probably won't be what you think's your best work. Usually, the track that does the best will be the one that you think's a load of shit. But when that happens, go with it, and then just try and take it in some other direction. Ultimately, what you're doing is you're putting stuff into the universe. You're putting some things in the universe that's still going to be there after you've gone, and that's the way to look at it. And being on TV and being on the front of a magazine, if that's your goal, then good for you. But it's not all there is.
If that's your goal, there may be easier ways to get there.
Yeah, that's it.
You might want to.
If your goal is to become rich and famous, try any way other than music to do it first.
Absolutely. So I would just say, hey, you make the music that's in your heart, that you hear in your head, and make it the absolute best that you can do. Get feedback, talk to other people, share it with your friends, you know, and get it out, and then do the next record. Just keep putting out music, because you don't know what is going to touch people. And that's really what we want to do, is we really want to touch people. We really want to move people. And maybe you don't move people as many people, let's put it that way, as somebody like David Bowie or Prince or Tom Petty or Eddie Van Halen. But, maybe you move a handful of people. And there are many indie artists. And I think Carrie has the same way. And I think, maybe even Joe would say the same thing, that these weren't big bands or anything like that, but I have their CD, and I get their CD out and I listen to it because the music really touched me. It really meant something to me. It really moved me. So you don't know who's listening out there, guys, and you also don't know, as far as this business goes, the world is, we're living in a very ever changing world. So who knows the importance that music is going to play in the culture, and I think it's more important than ever that artists get out there and just make the absolute best music that they can make right now. Kerry, if folks want to get in touch with you, how do they find you on the internet?
At KerryJK on Twitter, kjkmusic.co.uk is my site. Okay. And also madno.net. I have a few blog posts on what we've been talking about.
Awesome. And you can find me at LouLombardiRocks.com. Guys, thanks for hanging out. We'll catch you all on the next Loudini Rock and Roll Circus Musicians Mastermind. Awesome. I'm going to end all the feeds and everything. How you doing over there, brother? You all right?
Yeah.
Everybody healthy and...
Yeah, pretty much. Got to go out and get some shopping in a minute.
Okay, man. Well, hey, thanks for coming on. And